Hello and welcome to the first in this series of Certified Wireless Design Professional Certification Tutorials. I'm your host, Steve Evans, CWNE number 177. This module is entitled Gathering Requirements. So here's what we'll cover in this module. First, we'll talk about the business requirements for a new wireless design. We'll talk about the technical requirements that are driving the design as well. We'll also discuss the existing infrastructure in place at any enterprise or business looking for a wireless LAN design, installation, or upgrade. We'll talk about some constraints that the enterprise may have that may affect the overall design. We'll follow up by creating the scope of the wireless design. We'll end with a summary to go over what we talked about in this module. And then finally, we'll jump into an exercise to test your knowledge of what you learned in this module. So let's get started. So, business requirements. Business requirements are the key drivers behind the push for a new wireless design or wireless design in general. Now, behind those business requirements are four main topics. There are the locations that need to be considered for any new wireless design or existing redesign. There's the goals and objective for any new wireless design. There are also application considerations for a new wireless design or existing upgrade. And last but not least, there are implications and considerations for security needs for a wireless design. Now keep in mind that these business requirements are not in order of priority because the priority is dictated by the business. So locations. A business may have multiple locations, and these multiple locations could be geographically dispersed or they could be spread out over a few kilometers. Now, in this scenario, we're talking about multiple campuses of the same organization. The locations could also be within the same building. Now, I want to stress that understanding each business requirement is not the point in which you conduct your survey. At this point, as a wireless engineer, your sole task in this phase is to understand the requirements. Now, with locations, you will be documenting the location or locations of the organization that requires either new Wi-Fi or an upgrade to the existing Wi-Fi. Now, keep in mind that the locations that span multiple campuses may require point-to-point links. Let's talk about goals and objectives as part of the business requirements. The goals and objectives for any organization looking to install new Wi-Fi or an upgrade to the existing Wi-Fi could be looking at three different possibilities. Their goal could be to enhance an already existing Wi-Fi infrastructure, or it could be to rip out and replace old or outdated Wi-Fi infrastructure and replace it with a new one. Now, the goal could also be focused on future growth. The organization could be looking to expand either to different parts of the building or expand to multiple branch offices located in geographically dispersed areas. Now, perhaps the organization has a more strategic goal in mind, in that they're planning for future hardware or applications and need the Wi-Fi infrastructure to support it. Now, when it comes to applications, an organization may be looking to enhance or support applications that require a higher level of quality. In this respect, they're looking for quality of service support, perhaps for real-time applications. Now, this could go hand in hand or be in addition to overall end-user quality of experience. And now let's talk about security. Security, of course, is a big concern for all businesses, or at least it should be. Now, this is especially true for financial organizations. Now, some of the things that should be considered are accounting requirements. Accounting entails keeping a database or record of who has access and when they have accessed the resources on the network. They should also be looking to discover vulnerabilities in their existing infrastructure. They could have a requirement or a concern about clients that may or may not support any new security requirement. Now, this concern is especially true for legacy clients. Now I want to provide a little bit of background about the accounting requirements that are part of a Radius server, also known as a AAA server. Now, AAA stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. And this is basically the main database for enterprise-level security that verifies that you are who you say you are when you're coming onto the network. Yet the accounting portion of the function of the Radius server is that piece that tracks each user's log on and log off time. And the information is stored in its built-in accounting database. Now, it could also provide metrics on data usage. This may or may not be a security requirement as part of the overall business requirement. Another requirement is the need to point out or discover any existing solutions vulnerabilities. In other words, a business may want to perform an assessment on their existing security protocol wireless solution, and you may be called upon to point out their weak points and provide recommendations on improvements. Now, one thing that's often overlooked is the physical aspect of it. Now, when walking around the facility, you should make a note of any physical security vulnerabilities. Now, what do I mean by that? So, for example, if you're walking around and you see access points that are laying around but still connected to the network via a loose Ethernet cable, this should be added to your documentation. You should also be cognizant of all wireless clients that will be accessing the network. As a wireless engineer, you'll be making a note of all the legacy clients that exist and will be used. Now, I want to stress at this point that you will not be making any recommendations. Your job is to assess the current situation and the business requirements. And in this context, the organization may have a requirement to support all of their legacy clients. Now, after your documentation is complete, you'll want to assess the client capabilities. Now let's talk about technical requirements. Now, requirements could encompass coverage areas, capacity or how many people the new Wi-Fi solution should support, and a revisit to the client device capabilities and limitations, and also any preferences for specific Wi-Fi vendors that the organization may have. Now let's talk about coverage. This may be one of the most important pieces of information that you gather. Now, as you walk around the facility, you should have a set of floor plans with you. It's also good to have both digital and hard copy floor plans with you. In the hard copy, as you walk around, it'll allow you to make notes based on a number of factors. That could be the number of planned clients. It could also be wall structures. It could be future use locations. It could also be areas that you may want to spend a little bit of extra time during your Wi-Fi survey based on visual observations. Those observations could be places where there's a lot of metal shelving that could cause multipath. For capacity, you want to make a special note of high capacity areas. For example, if you have the requirement to supply Wi-Fi for an auditorium style seating area, make a note of the number of seats or the max capacity of that area. So, returning to the client device capabilities and limitations, you should make a note of all the client device types and their limitations. You should also make note of any equipment refresh plans that the organization may have. The organization may have the newest devices that support 11AC, while at the same time have legacy devices that support BG, such as barcode scanners that cannot be discontinued. Oftentimes, you may run into a situation where an organization already knows what new vendor they would like to replace their existing wireless infrastructure with. Now, this may be based on industry reputation or strength in a particular area that the organization sees one vendor surpassing the other. Now, your job is not to influence the organization in one vendor or another. So let's talk about existing infrastructure. Some of the things that you want to make special note of are the switch capacities and power ratings. The switch capacity for layer 2 access devices should support new access points in number and in power, or PoE. You should also understand their existing bandwidth out to the internet. Any new Wi-Fi that is installed will be limited by the amount of bandwidth out to the internet. Now to understanding constraints. You may find that any new Wi-Fi design suffer the same constraints as a typical project. They may be constrained by budget and time. You must understand the overall budget for the Wi-Fi installation and the length of time from start to finish that you have to work with. Now, this is dictated by the organization only. You may also be constrained by equipment placement that goes hand in hand with building aesthetics. The aesthetics constraint may dictate the placement and orientation of your access points. Let's talk about creating the scope for your design. Now, as part of creating the scope, you want to set expectations appropriately for the design and end result. As part of gathering requirements, you'll be producing a customer requirements document, or CRD. You'll also be producing what's known as a statement of work, or SOW. Let's dive into a bit more about what these mean. Now, for setting expectations, do not overpromise. At the same time, don't get into a situation where you may be introducing what's known in management lingo as scope creep, or adding new requirements after the fact. Having a clearly defined customer requirements document and statement of work should take care of this. The customer requirements document is basically an agreement with the customer that states that you understand their requirements and you both agree on the end state of the wireless LAN implementation. Now, this customer requirements document should specify mandatory requirements but may contain optional or desired requirements. It is your job as a wireless engineer to clearly draw a dividing line between what's mandatory and what's optional. The statement of work, or SOW, is the only legally binding document that is the output of your requirements gathering. It outlines the scope of work and clearly defines the acceptance criteria whereby the customer will accept the solution. So that brings us to the end of this particular module. And let's go over what we've discussed and what you've learned. We discussed the business requirement for a wireless LAN design. We went over the technical requirements. We followed that with considerations for any existing infrastructure that may be in place. We also went over understanding constraints of the business. And finally, we covered creating the scope of the wireless design. And now it's time to test your knowledge of what you learned in this module with an exercise.